Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. If you are not on yet or you are getting ready to join us, thank you for being here tonight. My name is Sarah Beth McCready. I'm with the Council on Developmental Disabilities, and we are bringing to you all a educational series to help understand what it is like to have future planning in your life. We are going to break down for tonight for you government benefits and programs. I have joining me Gordon Holmes and Matt Gooden, and they are going to both give you a little bit of information, things that I have my notebook, which you may need to take some notes on. We also had a link inside of your registration where it said, please click here to print worksheets. So make sure you can refer back to that in case you didn't print those off. You just want to pull them up and look at them on your phone, maybe while you're watching this on the computer, whatever works best for you, but be prepared to take lots of notes. I myself am a parent of 2 special needs kiddos, and we are in the process of figuring out all things going forward because I have one that's getting to be 13. I have another one that's 8. So we're still on the back side of what her things are going to look like because they look completely different than my son did. So if you are in that same boat as I am, just trying to navigate all the things that are involved with being a caregiver of someone with special needs, then you are in the right place, my friend. That is what the council is made up of. Lots of friends and families who are all in the same boat, just trying to navigate what this world looks like. And that is how we have been blessed to work with all these amazing people like Matt and Gordon who know exactly what that is like. And thank you so much, guys, for being here. I'm so excited myself. Got a good pen ready to go because I'm prepared to take lots of notes and learn from you guys. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to let you take over and get started.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate that wonderful introduction, and we certainly appreciate the support of the Louisville Council on Developmental Disabilities and the opportunity to visit with you this evening. By way of introduction also, I want to introduce Jamie Sturgey, who is our parent advocate and relationship coordinator. So she's with us this evening as well. She is a parent of a son with special needs, and we're certainly thankful to have her on our team. So again, I'm Gordon Holmes. Professionally, I'm a certified financial planner. I've been in practice for many years. The last 22, 23 years have been dedicated almost exclusively to special needs. And I have a son who will be 26 this month on the autism spectrum with serious health issues as well. And so my focus on special needs was born out of my personal journey, and maintain offices in Indianapolis and Louisville and Lexington. And so we're there to help families. I want to give Matt a moment to share just a bit of his background and story, and then we're going to plunge into the very important subject matter this evening of government benefits. So Matt, could you help us?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. And thank you again, Sarah Beth, Kelsey, Bob, everyone at the council for helping put this on. And thank you guys for being with us tonight. Hopefully you all will find it as helpful as much as we enjoy providing the information. My name is Matthew Gooden. I'm a special needs attorney in Louisville, but I also assist families across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Just like Gordon, I have a sibling with special needs. My sister Rose has Down syndrome. She attends Down syndrome of Louisville. She will be 27 this year in September. I coach Special Olympics, been doing that for 12 years now. Hard to believe, time flies when you're having fun. So, just like Gordon, we each have that personal and professional connection to this area, which is very valuable. So looking forward to giving this education series, and we hope that you guys will be with us not only tonight, but in each of the next few weeks. So Gordon, you want to go ahead and get started?
Okay. So I'm going to do a screen share, and we'll bring up the PowerPoint. Okay, we're going to try to do screen share.
You should have the right.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Okay.
And before you get started, Gordon, let me just throw in there too, if anyone has questions throughout the presentation, if you would please put those in the chat section. I will be monitoring those and we will do questions at the end. So feel free to write any of your questions in the chats. That way anybody else that doesn't get to watch this but goes back and views later will have the chance to view those questions as well. And it could be something that maybe they were thinking as well. So never hesitate to ask a question, okay? And we appreciate your all's participation tonight as well.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. So this evening will be a deep dive into government programs and benefits, and there are always a lot of questions on this session. And so please don't be shy and do enter your questions into the chat. And we're so thankful to have Sarah Beth with us to monitor the chat box, and perhaps Jamie as well. And we'll make sure to get to your questions. They'll not only help you, but others that will be thankful the questions have been asked. Important disclosure, we work very hard to help families with the legal, the financial, government benefit issues, et cetera, but we are not all things to all people. And so we need to cover that. Special care is a division of Mass Mutual. So again, I'm a certified financial planner and I'm associated with the financial firm Mass Mutual. And it's a national program, Special Care. So if you're curious if there's, these types of benefits and opportunities across the country, the answer is yes. I'm one of about 300 highly trained advisors serving in our respective special needs communities. And our mission, as indicates there, is to help educate. So that will certainly be the focus this evening. So government plans are available, and we're going to cover supplemental security income, including the impact of employment, Social Security disability income, which sometimes comes as a surprise for individuals with special needs. That little part-time job that they have suddenly puts them on track to be eligible to draw Social Security disability. The impact of employment on that, and then also adult child benefits. We'll talk about Medicaid and Medicaid waivers, and also Medicare. So let's see, Matt, why don't you start with SSI?
And then I will switch it over once we get to SSDI, and we'll take it from there. All right, so before we begin our discussion on SSI, which is supplemental security income, I do want to take a brief second to take a step back and look at benefits more broadly. So, of course, our focus is all about government benefits, particularly those relevant to our loved ones with special needs. All of the benefits we'll discuss tonight are geared toward individuals with special needs. And one of the factors that make this area confusing for families is the fact that many of the benefits sound similar to one another. They're spelled similarly. They may be administered by the same entity, and they may have similar eligibility requirements. So with that in mind, I think it's important from the outset to give you guys a system to categorize each of the benefits as we go through them. I think it'll help you keep the benefits organized in your head, and hopefully clarify your understanding and reduce confusion. So all of the benefits, all government benefits will fall into one of two categories. The first is means-tested benefits, sometimes called needs-based benefits. And the second category is non-means-tested benefits, or non-needs-based. So first category, means-tested. Second category, non-means-tested. Every benefit we discussed tonight will fall into one of those categories. The first category, means-tested, have income and resource requirements in order to be eligible. Therefore, your income and resources cannot exceed those eligibility limits. Eligibility for those means-tested benefits is based on need. So think of, you have low income, you have low resources, and therefore you need the benefits. Contrast that with the second category, our non-means tested benefits. They do not have income and resource requirements in order to be eligible. Eligibility for those non-means tested benefits is based on some factor other than need. And we'll talk about what those other factors are as we go along. But for those non-means tested benefits, we're not concerned with the person's financial situation. So keep those two categories in mind as we walk through each of the benefits tonight, so that you can keep them organized in your head and organized in your notes. So with that being said, let's begin with SSI, Supplemental Security Income. SSI is a means tested benefit. So we're in that first category. Therefore, you have to meet income and resource eligibility requirements in order to qualify. SSI is a federal income program designed to supplement the food and shelter expenses, or the food and shelter needs of individuals with low income and low resources, who are either 65 and older, blind, or disabled. So for our purposes, we're focused on that last prong, the individuals with low income and low resources who are disabled. So how does Social Security define disabled? Who is considered disabled for purposes of SSI? So Social Security considers someone disabled if that person has a medically determinable physical or mental impairment that prevents them from engaging in a minimal amount of work. And Social Security calls that minimal amount of work substantial gainful activity. SGA is the abbreviated for that. And the impairment is expected to last at least a year or result in death. So, definition of disabled, have to have a physical or mental impairment that prevents you from engaging in a minimal amount of work, and that impairment is expected to last for at least a year or result in death. So that's our definition for disabled. We'll talk more about the substantial gainful activity threshold in a moment. SSI is designed to provide for the recipient's food and shelter needs, which means that SSI benefits are supposed to be used for food and shelter expenses of the recipient. What do we mean by food and shelter? Well, Social Security defines 10 items as food and shelter. Food is obviously food. The other 9 items are considered shelter expenses, and they are rent, mortgage, property taxes, heating fuel, gas, electric, water, sewer, and garbage removal. So think of basic utility expenses when we think of shelter expenses. As a preview to our discussion in a couple weeks, these items become important when we talk about special needs trusts and trust distributions. So be sure to tune in for that conversation, because we will touch back on these food and shelter expenses. For 2021, the maximum SSI benefit is $794 a month. If the recipient is receiving in-kind support and maintenance, which is abbreviated ISM, which means that someone else is paying for some or all of the recipient's food and shelter expenses, then the maximum SSI benefit is $529 a month. We'll talk more about this reduction in a moment, and again in 2 weeks when we talk about special needs trust, so we'll touch back on that again. As I mentioned, SSI is a means tested benefit, so you need to meet the financial requirements in order to be eligible. These financial requirements come in the form of limits on how much money you can receive on a monthly basis. That's our income requirement. And how much stuff you can own. That's our resource requirement. But before we discuss each of those, I do want to briefly touch on the issue of stimulus checks. And Gordon, we're going off script here a bit. I have had a couple parents reach out to me asking about what impact, if any, these stimulus checks have on their child's benefits. So these stimulus checks are considered an economic relief payment. Therefore, they are not considered income for purposes of determining an individual's eligibility for benefits. So it's not considered income. That's the rule from the income standpoint. From a resource standpoint, the stimulus checks are not considered a resource for 12 months. So if the individual receives a stimulus check and doesn't otherwise use the funds within 12 months, those funds do become accountable resource to the individual. So keep that in mind. So those are the rules on treatment of the stimulus checks. As I said, there have been some questions raised by a few parents. So I wanted to be sure to mention that here tonight since our topic is benefits, just in case any of you guys had similar questions or concerns. So with that being said, let's move to the income and resource requirements. The starting point, Gordon, can we go back one slide just for a moment? So the starting point for our discussion here is to define what is income and what is a resource. For Social Security purposes, income is defined as something received on a recurring month-to-month basis. Think about wages from employment as an example. A resource, on the other hand, is something that isn't received on a recurring month-to-month basis, but it is something that can be converted into cash easily. So think of a bank account as an example. A resource is also the accumulation of income from one month to the next. What this means is that if I have $100 of income from wages this month, and I spend $90 of it before the end of the month, the $10 I didn't spend, and therefore the $10 I carry forward with me to the next month becomes accountable resource the beginning of the next month. So that $10, if I carry it forward to the next month, does become a resource. So that's an important point to remember when we're talking about the income and resource definitions. So we'll start with the resource requirement. Social Security has a set of rules for the treatment of resources. Resource is just another word for asset. Again, kind of think of a bank account as an example. The resource requirement is $2,000, as most of you probably already know. So in order to be eligible for SSI, an individual's countable resources cannot exceed that $2,000 limit. However, when determining an individual's eligibility, Social Security doesn't count every resource a person owns. So under the Social Security rules, some resources are excluded or non-countable, is sometimes the word you'll hear. A few examples of these excluded or non-countable resources include the home in which the individual is living, a vehicle, so long as it's used as the primary transportation for the individual, and household good and personal belongings. So none of those items count against that $2,000 limit. So after applying the resource rules and taking away any of those excluded or non-countable resources from the equation, if the individual has $2,000 or less in countable resources, they meet the resource requirement, and then we move to the income requirement. So, Gordon, I think we can move ahead to the next slide there. Perfect. So, resource requirement, pretty straightforward. Can't have more than $2,000 in countable resources, and the list of what counts and doesn't count is pretty straightforward. On the other hand, the income requirement is a bit more complex. The first thing we have to know is whose income is being used to determine the SSI eligibility. So to answer that question, there are two sets of rules to keep in mind depending on the individual's age when they apply for benefits. So for children under age 18, there's a process called deeming in which the income and resources of the child's parents are looked at when determining whether or not the child is eligible for SSI. So the parents' finances will be applied to the income and resource limits to determine if the child is eligible. A lot of times, the parents' finances will render the child ineligible while they are a minor because the parents make too much or they own too much. However, once the child turns 18, deeming no longer applies, and therefore eligibility is strictly based on what the child's income and resources are. The parents' finances at that point become irrelevant. So for our purposes, age 18 is most often when SSI will become applicable, especially if it's a two-parent household where we have presumably twice as much income and twice as many assets in play. Last slide, we mentioned the maximum SSI benefit for someone who receives in-kind support and maintenance, ISM, as $529 a month. And again, ISM, in-kind support and maintenance, is where the recipient receives food and shelter expenses from some other source, or they're receiving this at a discounted rate. And what we mean by that is they're receiving or paying their less than their fair share, or they're receiving it for free. So under the Social Security rules, if a recipient receives in-kind support and maintenance, their SSI benefit is reduced up to 1/3 of the maximum monthly benefit. The maximum benefit, as we touched on, is $794 a month. 1/3 of that is approximately $265. So you take your $794 minus $265, and that's how we get to our $529. This is where the statement of household expenses and contribution come into play. So if an adult with special needs lives at home with their parents and is receiving SSI, Social Security will assume that the parents are providing some food and shelter to the individual, some in-kind support and maintenance to the child. Thus, the 1/3 reduction in benefits. If, however, it can be shown that the adult with special needs is paying their fair share of those food and shelter expenses, the 1/3 reduction can be avoided. And that's where the statement of household expenses and contribution provides, or can be helpful. And it provides information to Social Security showing that the individual is in fact paying their fair share of those food and shelter expenses. So basically, you would want to create a spreadsheet over a few months period listing the food and shelter expenses for your household, and dividing that amount by the number of people in your household, and you would get a per person share of the monthly food and shelter expenses. And then you would use that per person amount to determine how much your dependent with special needs should pay each month for their share. Does that make sense? Any questions thus far on anything we've touched on so far?
There is a question in the chat. It says, if an individual uses Venmo account, eBay, or PayPal account, how would you account for these type of resources if an individual has them?
So, and Gordon, if you want to touch in on this as well. So typically in the application process, you have to disclose or report certain things. Obviously, you have to report your sources of income, and you also have to report your resources. So assuming that they aren't excluded or non-countable, they would need to be reported. Now, of course, if it doesn't, depending on the amount in the account, if it's not going to run afoul with that $2,000 limit, then it doesn't really present as an issue. Gordon, anything you want to add to that?
Right. Well, I think part of it is those are functions by which purchases can be made, et cetera. I guess the potential exists that one would carry a credit or that type of thing. So I suppose if there was a recurring accumulation of funds for future purchases, it could become a factor going from one month to the next. But I wouldn't worry too much about it if any balances are temporary, or it's primarily used as a function by which to to make purchases, that type of thing.
Yeah, and kind of to that point, once once we get into the income rules, if there's money that comes into the account, then it would be income. And again, if it's not spent out of the account before the end of the month, technically it becomes a resource. But again, depending on the dollar figure, if it's relatively low, then it really doesn't cause us too much of a concern.
Yeah, we had another question here too in the question box. It says, how does selling things that an SSI recipient owns affect eligibility for SSI? I'm thinking of proceeds from a yard sale or proceeds from recycling materials, etc. How should you proceed with things like this? How would you suggest that that be handled? I'm thinking of small amounts of money.
So this, it's kind of a couple ways to look at this. There is a rule for Medicaid eligibility where it prevents someone who is trying to apply for Medicaid eligibility or for Medicaid. It prevents them from just giving away their assets in order to qualify. However, with the example used here with like yard sale items and things like that, for most of those items, just take it, assuming for a moment, most of those items probably are like household items. They probably don't have a formal ownership record. So there might not really be a way to show necessarily that what is being sold is in fact the individual with SSI. So I'm for sure that there would be an issue there in that regard. And again, if the dollar figure is low, then of course we don't really have an issue as well. If things are being sold and the person gets $5,000 from the proceeds, that's a different story. But if it's small dollar figures, probably not too big of an issue. Gordon, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I would concur. I think everyone seeks, opportunities to make the most of what resources they have, et cetera. And clearly, a little bit of minor bartering or yard sale, garage sale type of thing is an opportunity for, people in the community to help each other. And I think it flies largely under the radar from a government benefit standpoint. I think, as Matt was mentioning, it's when you go to the bank and make a deposit of, hundreds of dollars as a result of your activity that it draws attention. But small amounts handled in cash, I really just, I'm not concerned.
Yeah, and sometimes, and that points out something to note. Sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between what the rules say and what actually operates in practice. So, and this is kind of falls into that category. So, Gordon, can we go back one slide just for a second? I want to make sure that we. Okay, yeah, we'll touch on the rest of this here for a second. So, now that we know, we've talked about whose income is relevant to eligibility and when, we'll look at the income rules in a little bit more detail. And this is laid out in bullet point number 2. So Social Security has a series of rules for the treatment of income, just as they have a series of rules for the treatment of resources. And as you'll see as we walk through these rules, not all income is counted against an individual, just like not all resources were counted, which means that a portion of the person's income is excluded or disregarded, is sometimes the word you'll hear. And this is important because a person's SSI benefit is only affected by their countable income. And we determine a person's countable income in a given month after applying or by applying the income rules that we're going to walk through. So to illustrate the second bullet point, I think it's most helpful to walk through an example so that you can see how the rules actually apply to a real situation. So the example isn't on the slides, so I encourage you to write down the numbers used so that you can follow along and keep things organized. So let's go through an example. Let's assume that an individual is currently receiving the maximum SSI benefit of $794 a month. and they get a part-time job and they make $885 from employment in a given month. So Social Security will see that the individual earned $885 in wages in a particular month, because that's one of the things you do have to report, that their wages to Social Security. Talk about that more in a second. So Social Security sees that. So to determine the impact those wages have on the individual's SSI benefit, Social Security walks through the income rules to see how much of that 885 is countable, and therefore how much of the 885 will impact the individual's SSI benefit. Because remember, only the countable income affects the SSI benefit. So the first $20 of income is excluded under what is called the general income exclusion. This excludes the first $20 of a person's income regardless of its nature. So regardless of it, if it's earned or unearned income. So this, using our example, this leaves us with 865. We started with 885, we subtract 20, now we're at 865. An important point I want to mention as we walk through these rules is to remember that when we say this amount is excluded or this amount is excluded, the amount itself isn't actually being taken away from the individual. They aren't losing their wages. We're simply walking through the formula Social Security uses to determine that countable income to the person for a given month. And then therefore how much the person's SSI benefit should be reduced, if any. Okay, so general income exclusion, $20 subtracted. Next, $65 of income is excluded under what's called the earned income exclusion. This excludes the first $65 of earned income, only applies to earned income. So this leaves us with 800. Started with 885, we subtract 20, we subtract 65, that leaves us with 800. Next, half of all remaining income is excluded. So $400 of our 800 is then excluded. That remaining $400 that hasn't been excluded represents the amount of countable income to that person for that given month. And it's that $400 of countable income that is then subtracted from the SSI benefit they're receiving. So in our example, they were receiving $794 a month. We subtract 400 of countable income. That leaves them with $394 as their SSI benefit for that particular month. So to kind of look at the month as a whole, that month their SSI benefit is $394. They earned $885 from wages for a total of $1,279. Hopefully everyone is still with me. Hopefully that example makes sense. To kind of help explain that a bit and to help explain how the rules work in practice. So Social Security operates a month behind. So using our example, the individual would report their wages for a given month. And so they earn it within the first 10 days of the next month, they would have to report those wages. Social Security would then retroactively determine, based on those wages that were submitted, how much SSI the individual should have received that particular month. So they're operating kind of after the fact. So if the individual received more SSI than they should have based on what they earned, Social Security will reduce the individual's monthly benefit moving forward to account for that overpayment. So just to kind of give you a little understanding of what goes on after the fact. Another important income rule is the student earned income exclusion, which excludes up to, and it's actually $1,930 per month of income, up to a maximum of $7,770 of income per year, if the recipient is under 22 and in school. And this means that the individual can work while in school and exclude most, if not all, of their income from employment, which is very valuable because the person is able to earn wages without any reduction to their SSI benefit, because remember, it's excluded, it's not countable. Only the countable income affects SSI. But of course, assuming the wages that they're earning are below the student earned income exclusion limits. Another important income rule relates to child support. So if the individual is under age 18, 1/3 of the child support payment is excluded. Once the individual turns 18, however, any child support payment reduces the SSI benefit dollar for dollar. So age 18 is an important date there. And we'll move to the next slide. So to kind of pull all of these items together, here's a summary of factors that may affect SSI eligibility and the corresponding benefit. So age of the individual, if they're under age 18, the parent's finances will potentially determine or have an impact on the child's eligibility. Where the individual lives and whether or not they pay their share of food and shelter expenses is another factor. Utilizing that statement of household expenses and contributions is a good way to show that the individual is not receiving food and shelter for free and that they are in fact paying their fair share of such expenses and thereby avoiding that 1/3 reduction under the in-kind support and maintenance rules. Third factor, resources of the individual. So we talked about that, can't have more than $2,000 in resources. Another important side note here, the accumulation of benefits over the course of several months does count as a resource to the individual. So simply saving the benefits and letting them accumulate month over month is not good, because once the accumulated benefits reach that $2,000 limit, the individual's eligibility is potentially jeopardized. So this is also where that statement of household expenses and contributions can help, because if the individual is receiving the full benefit, $794 a month, but they're paying their parents, presumably, $750 each month for their portion of food and shelter expenses, the remaining funds in the account at the end of each month is much smaller, and therefore they don't accumulate as fast and don't impact the individual's eligibility until much further down the line, assuming that they're not otherwise spent. So keep that in mind. This also foreshadows our conversation, which we will likely talk about week 3 when we talk about special needs trust as well. By having the individual pay their fair share of food and shelter expenses each month, not only are we avoiding that 1/3 reduction under the ISM rules and helping to prevent the accumulation of benefits and running afoul with our $2,000 resource limit, but we're also changing the legal ownership of those funds from the child with special needs to the parents. And this is important when we talk about the special needs trusts, the types of special needs trusts, and who can fund which type. So for now, just know that this reimbursement from child to parent for their fair share of food and shelter expenses each month is serving other important purposes, which we'll talk about later in the series. Fourth factor, is the individual working? If so, how much are they earning? If they're not working, are they able to work? And if so, how much are they able to earn? If the individual is working and earning more than the substantial gainful activity threshold, which for 2021 is $1,310 per month, then the individual is not considered disabled for Social Security purposes and therefore not eligible for benefits. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Fifth factor, is the individual under 22 and in school? If so, they can take advantage of the student earned income exemption. Lastly, is the individual receiving child support payments? And if so, how old is the child? Because the rule changes if they're 18. All of these factors will determine whether or not an individual is eligible for SSI, and whether or not, or to the extent that they're eligible. So the amount of benefits that they're eligible for. So that's SSI. Any questions on SSI before we switch to SSDI?
Matt, there's a couple questions
Okay.
in the chat. The first one is, will you be talking about when a child receives Social Security from a parent?
Yeah, so we're SSDI, we're going to start talking about how the parents are tied in with that. And I think that question is probably going to be answered by our discussion on SSDI. So we'll hold on that question for a moment.
Okay, and then the other one was, if there's a sibling in the house and he or she is working, does their income count if the individual is under 18?
So typically we would look at the parents. However, there are many arrangements. So for example, if the individual wasn't necessarily living with parents, they were living with other family members, potentially the other family members' income could be looked at. But most of the time we're focused on just the parents. Gordon, anything you want to add on that?
No, I think that's correct. It's a household situation for food stamps for SSI under the age of 18. So I wouldn't rule out a number of factors weighing on the situation. That's part of the benefit of getting to 18. It becomes a bit simpler. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then I think another question, Matt, I see is if accounts go over because the current guardian has just died, in the process of getting new guardian assigned, so bills have not been paid, how do we handle with report? So I guess a situation that's off track because a guardian passed away. Boy, that's a very individual situation. We could be looking at survivor benefits as a result of a guardian, depending upon what the relationship of the guardian was. I don't think if it's a short-lived situation, we'd have an issue with Medicaid or waiver services. It would probably be an SSI issue if SSI is involved, as opposed to SSDI. And then again, we could be getting into survivor benefits. So that we'd have to have more information, and I think it's probably the first perfect opportunity to mention as a result of participating in the series. We're making available a free follow-up consultation to all families. And so, yeah, questions and situations that are very specific, we might better handle with the free follow-up consultation. And we'll talk at the end about how we're facilitating that. We've had a lot of people take advantage of that, and that's setting aside 90 minutes, anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes, either in person or virtually, to drill deep into all that we're going to cover in the 4-week series and how it applies to your situation, and to look at various scenarios and what ifs, etc. So,
Gordon, anything just to add on to that question, like you said, I don't think Medicaid eligibility necessarily would be an issue. I think depending if the issue is we have too much sitting in the account, presumably there could be a temporary suspension of the SSI benefits because we have too much. So it's better to have their situation resolved as quickly as possible, obviously, and to get someone else appointed to replace the guardian. So, but I think overall, probably the most likely case or worst case scenario, SSI benefits temporarily suspended until we get the account lower than the limits. Medicaid eligibility shouldn't be an issue, but again, perfect opportunity to take advantage of the follow-up consultation, or we can discuss it in more detail. So. And Gordon, I think this is where I will pass the baton off to you to talk about SSDI and adult child benefits.
Okay, thank you. So SSI is a needs-based benefit. This is now SSDI is an entitlement. And so we're kind of crossing the stream into a different area. Okay. SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, disability income pays benefits to an adult who have a disability that began before age 22. This is what we call adult child benefits. So we were asked earlier about the potential of drawing off of a parent's record. So drawing off of a parent's record is what we call adult child benefits, historically or previously known as DAC or DAC, Disabled Adult Child Benefits. So you hear different references, but an individual with special needs has the ability to draw SSI from birth on up if there are income and or resource limitations or problems that it may be at age 18. It's not unusual for a consumer with special needs to start drawing SSDI off of their own Social Security record when they're in their 20s, if they've maintained some amount of consistent part-time income, again, part-time income. And then ultimately, when parents either retire, file for Social Security disability themselves, or pass away, they can be eligible to draw off of the parent's record. We'll talk about the qualifying elements to that in a moment. In fact, I guess we'll do it now. Unmarried, or in some cases, if married to a consumer, also Social Security eligible. And so this is what we call a DAC married to a DAC, a disabled adult child married to another disabled adult child. So if one is eligible to draw off of a parent and the other is as well, then we have what we call kind of an equally yoked situation, and they can continue, in many cases, drawing off of a parent's record. If an individual eligible to draw disabled adult child benefits from a parent marries someone that does not have a disability, then typically the opportunity to draw off of the parent's record is lost. It's a tricky issue, and this is where working with someone like Matt and myself can be very helpful, because without having a depth of knowledge about these issues, it's very easy to get into the tall weeds or do things without understanding the implications on benefits. And these benefits can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars during your loved one's lifetime. And so it's nothing to sneeze at, certainly. So again, income limit, earned income, $13.10 per month. So if someone is working and they're repeatedly exceeding the $13.10 per month, then they're demonstrating to Social Security that their disability is not meeting the Social Security standard or definition, and therefore they're not going to be eligible to draw off of their own record or off of the record of a parent. And the limit is higher for someone legally blind, and there we do have the current 2021 limit. We have a correction to make on an earlier slide I've made a note of, but that was because of a lot of lobbying years ago, and they got special treatment. Be aware of pay frequency. This can become an issue. Certainly the most popular ways for individuals with special needs to be paid, the typical way in jobs accommodating them, will be either weekly or bi-weekly. We rarely see monthly, so it's nearly always weekly or bi-weekly. And so you've got to be careful for the months in which there are 5 paychecks or there are 3 bi-weekly paychecks, because in some cases it can push a person up over the $1,310 per month. What's the problem with that? Well, you're just, again, repeatedly demonstrating to Social Security you don't meet the standard or definition of disability from their perspective. And so it can undermine the ability to draw off of one's record, and even in the future to draw off of a parent's record, which can be really valuable. And we'll look at some examples of that in a moment. The benefit can continue throughout the lifetime of the adult. So I'm often asked, so they can draw off of a parent's record, but what happens when the parent dies? And the answer is they can continue, in most cases, drawing off of the parent's record. In fact, in some cases, the adult child takes an increase in benefit when they move to survivor benefits from adult child benefits. So again, these benefits are powerful. Child's benefit, because it is paid on a biological, adoptive, and in some instances, a step-parent Social Security earnings record. For an adult person with a disability to become entitled to this child benefit, one of the parents must be receiving Social Security retirement, and that can be as early as 62. So 62 to 70, somewhere in there, a parent is likely to decide they want to start drawing Social Security retirement. So that's one of the triggers. Or at any age, a parent can start drawing Social Security disability benefits if they've made application and are approved for those benefits for themselves, or a parent has died having paid enough into the Social Security system in the way of credits to create survivor benefits for those they leave behind. So these are all the triggering events that allow, in this case, an individual with special needs to draw off of a parent's record. It doesn't have to be an adult, a young person with special needs or a disability can draw off of a parent's record if the parent retires, dies, or becomes disabled. So really it's from birth on up. It's just that for many of our consumers with special needs, the event for the parent, death, disability, or retirement, doesn't occur until they're an adult. So the typical progression is SSI involvement until either the consumer has worked enough to be eligible to draw off of their own record, in which case they're often a hybrid or dual eligible, as we call it, drawing both SSDI off of their own record and an additional measure of SSI. That often continues until the parent has a triggering event when they can draw off of the parent's record. Most often, not always, but most often at that point, the SSI is completely gone, replaced with the adult child benefit, and those benefits can be substantial. We see certainly benefits exceeding $1,000 a month regularly. Okay, so it pays a benefit to adults who have a disability that began, let's see here. Let me see, we can get the slides moving. Yeah, there we go. Okay, SSDI can replace SSI, as we were just saying, or be paid in addition to, that's the dual eligible, depending upon the SSDI benefit amount. So if the SSDI benefit amount exceeds the $794, then SSI is completely replaced. SSDI may be paid from a consumer's own earnings record. 4 quarters of Social Security are earned in a year with $5,880 or more in earnings. So if you break that down, that's a little less than $500 per month. Or if they're being paid weekly, that's $125 a week. If they're being paid $10 an hour, which we're starting to see wages in that range, that could be no more than 12 or 13 hours a week. So very part-time income in many situations is sufficient to rack up the quarters of coverage with Social Security. And of course, we're all programmed that you need 10 years or 40 quarters, but at a young age, it's not the case. At younger ages, SSDI eligibility can be achieved in as little as 2 years. If either of those are not full calendar years or a full 4 quarters, then it may take a 3rd year to get there. But if they start with some sort of employment at 19 or 20 years of age, by their early 20s, they can be dual eligible or drawing Social Security disability off of their own wage record. SSI and or SSDI coexist well with part-time employment. Unlike SSI, SSDI does not require resources be kept less than $2,000, but Medicaid does. And for most of our consumers, they have a waiver, they're on a waiting list for a waiver, they have Medicaid, and so that ever-present $2,000 resource limit stays in place. But the benefit here is that with SSDI, unlike SSI, you do not get penalized for having earned income. There isn't the $85 waived and then $1 reduced for every $2 earned. So as an example, a consumer can earn $800 per month from their part-time job while receiving $400 a month in SSDI. while still retaining their Medicaid and their Medicaid waiver services. So learning these benefits and how you can layer them and have access to multiple benefit opportunities is really powerful. Okay.
Hey, Gordon, question in the chat. Can you give an example of how a step parent would be applicable here?
Yes, I can. A step parent Social Security record becomes involved when the consumer is a dependent of that step parent. So typically the IRS defines dependency by the step parent providing assistance with at least 50% of their cost, their living expenses, et cetera. So if the step parent is able to claim the consumer as a dependent based on providing at least half of their living expenses, then in that situation, we do see the step parent's work record becoming involved in an adult child benefit situation. So then you have a case where, goodness, you could have the adult child drawing Social Security benefits, having a pool of people to pick from, a biological parent, an adoptive parent, a step parent. And so you might say, but how do they decide? Well, you go where the money is. And so whoever has the strongest earnings record and therefore the largest full retirement age for most age 67 benefit is what they would typically gravitate to. Now, oftentimes it's a progression to get there. I mentioned before, it may start with SSI as a young person or at age 18. And then perhaps they're dual eligible, drawing some Social Security disability as well as SSI. Then they draw off of maybe the first parent that retires. And most often the first parent to retire is the lower wage earner. And that is because there's simply more financially at stake for the higher wage earner to continue working to at least full retirement age of 67. And so they can step from their Social Security disability benefit off of themselves to drawing off of, in addition, a parent that had the lower wage record that may decide to retire at 62, and then ultimately or eventually step up to drawing off of the record of the larger wage earner. And we will be talking about how rich these benefits can be here in a moment. Hopefully that answered that question. What other questions have popped up? I see both Q&A and chat.
We
Yeah,
have one. Oh, sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
no, you can.
It says for an SSI recipient age 37, can a part-time job over a period of several years lead to eligibility or SSDI on the SSI recipient's own work record?
The answer is yes. Yes. If the part-time employment is generating earned income in roughly the $500 per month range or more, then each year they do that, they're getting the benefit of 4 quarters. And it depends upon how young they are. At the youngest age, such as 18 through 22, it only takes 8 quarters or potentially as little as 2 years. As one gets more years on them, it requires more quarters and it's graduated in. So if we want to get specific to just how many quarters and do calculations, perfect thing to do in the individual consultation. But the general answer to the question is yes. They can develop while they're drawing SSI. Actually, believe it or not, they have Medicaid, they have Medicaid waiver services. They're drawing SSI while they're working part-time. And if that part-time income is basically 500 or more per month, then they are accumulating quarters to eventually become eligible for Social Security disability. So they're employed while they're earning SSI. They continue to be employed while they're earning SSDI and perhaps some additional SSI. And they continue to be employed as they draw off of a parent. So again, this works beautifully while maintaining part-time employment. Where we usually get into issues of income is when the number of hours start creeping ahead of 25 hours. That's usually or frequently a make or break, but the bottom line boils down to the numbers like the 1310 per month this year for substantial gainful activity. Other questions before we move on? Okay. A benefit that comes with SSDI is Medicare. And I'm often asked, if they get Medicare, does that mean they're going to lose their Medicaid? And the answer is probably not. The way to keep Medicaid is to stay under the $2,000 and there is an income limit, an overarching disability Medicaid income limit when they have a waiver of $2,382 per month, $2,382. So you stay under 2,000 in the way of resources, and then you stay under your total income between SSI, SSDI, earned income, interest income, gifts, etc. You stay under the $2,382, and then you can have it all, keep it all, that type of thing. So the consumer becomes eligible for Medicare in 24 months after their first month of SSDI benefits are received. So once they become eligible for SSDI, even if it's a small benefit of $300 or $400 a month, the clock starts ticking, and 24 months later, they get their Medicare card, and they can retain their Medicaid. So they can have Medicare, Medicaid, as well as, again, these other benefits, SSI, SSDI, waiver services, et cetera. You start adding up or tabulating the dollar value of all these benefits, and that's why we say easily you can get into hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of benefits over their lifetime. So let's ratchet it up a little more and talk about what they might be able to draw off of a parent. So child benefit amounts can reach as much as $2,000 per month, depending upon whether the parent's triggering event was retirement, disability, or death, and if there is a surviving spouse, because of what we call family maximums. But the upper reach of what a child can draw off of a parent is about $2,000 per month, and they can draw that while still maintaining their part-time employment. In our third in a series, we will talk about special needs trusts and what avenues are available to deal with staying under the $2,382 per month. It's even possible to go above the $2,382, but some special planning is involved. But there is so much that can be done and so many opportunities that exist from a planning perspective these days. The message is one of hope and encouragement, because it's really amazing what the possibilities are when we understand how to navigate, as Sarah was talking about earlier. Okay, to maximize the child's benefit, and this is where sometimes I drop on the popularity poll, but the highest parent wage earner would usually do a service to at least delay drawing Social Security retirement to age 67. Even if you retire before 67, if you wait till 67, full retirement age, that's the age at which anyone that draws off of you, that could be a spouse that you're married to. It could be an ex-spouse that you were married to for at least 10 years. It can be an adult child with a disability. A person could have could have multiple people drawing off of their Social Security record. But in terms of hitting the maximum amount that anyone can draw off of their record, that occurs at full retirement age, which for most is age 67. So if the highest wage earner hits age 62 and decides that's it, and starts drawing their Social Security retirement, then they've really substantially limited the amount of benefit that their adult child can draw off of them. And you might ask how much? Well, for the most part, from that age 67 full retirement age, for each 1 year you wait towards 70, your benefit goes up by close to 8% per year. And for each year from age 67 dropping down towards 62, you draw early, the benefit is close to 8% less. So if we look at a 5-year period from 67 to 62, 5 years, 8%, that's 40%. That's huge. And that's not only for the lifetime of the parent, but it also is the lifetime of the child with a disability. And if that child lives to be a ripe old age, we could be talking 30, 40 years of being limited in terms of the Social Security benefit that they could potentially draw off of a parent. And we're not talking drawing, $900 versus $1,000. We could be talking drawing $2,000 versus $1,500 or $1,400. I mean, we're talking big numbers in many cases. And so again, for the highest wage earner, usually best to plan on working until 67, or at a minimum waiting until 67 to start drawing Social Security retirement. And before the question comes up until about 4 or 5 years ago, we had file and suspend, where somebody could say, it's 67 and I want to file and then suspend my filing so that others can draw off of me, but that's no more. Anyone that draws off of you, except for a divorced spouse that you were married to for at least 10 years, they're the only ones that don't have to wait. But other than the divorced spouse that you were married to for at least 10 years, your current spouse, as well as any adult child to draw off of your record, has to wait until you draw. Okay. Yep, we're moving out of SSDI. So we're going to be leaving Social Security, at least at this time. Questions, please. Okay, we're wanting an example, and the answer is yes. I think an example is coming, or maybe it's with the ABLE and the Social Security. Okay, Matt gave an example, but let me check here and see. We'll just page forward a little bit. Okay, no, and that's a great takeaway for me. We have them built in later in the series, but perhaps we should consider building in a couple of examples to the government benefits area. I think the reason that we hadn't thus far is because it usually is all that we can do to finish this one in 90 minutes. But we'll take that under advisement, but do know that multiple examples are coming next week with the ABLE account program. We'll be looking at ABLE and different income scenarios with ABLE. And then we also have scenarios with special needs trusts in week 3. So please hang in there with us as we move through forward through the 4 series, because we've got more examples built in subsequent workshops. Okay. All right. And I think we're ready, Matt, for you to jump back in if you would, sir.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Quickly before we move to Medicare and Medicaid, quick review using our 2 categories of public benefits. So SSI, means tested benefit, SSDI, non-means tested benefit. So keep those in mind. We'll use those same 2 categories as we go through our discussion on Medicare and Medicaid. Our first point to remember, don't confuse Medicaid with Medicare. Much like SSI and SSDI, the terms sound similar, they're spelled similarly, but they are very different benefits. So it's important to keep this information organized as we're going through. Often when it comes to government benefits for an individual with special needs, the benefits we're most concerned with protecting are the health insurance benefits, particularly Medicaid. And you'll see why as we go through our discussion. And often the Medicare, Medicaid discussion takes priority or takes somewhat of a front seat to the SSI, SSDI discussion, because replacing the health insurance coverage that Medicare and Medicaid provide is much more difficult than replacing SSI or SSDI benefits. Because at the end of the day, while SSI and SSDI are very important, those benefits are providing cash or a cash equivalent to the recipient. And there are situations where the individual may have other sources, such as family members, that can provide that same income to the individual in the event that the SSI or SSDI is lost. The same is not always true with the health insurance coverage. So losing Medicare and or Medicaid benefits can have a much more drastic impact on the individual with special needs. So let's start with Medicare. Medicare is a federal age-based health insurance program that provides coverage to individuals who are either 65 and older or individuals under 65 who are disabled. So using our classification system, Medicare non-means tested benefit, which means there aren't any financial requirements in order to qualify. So eligibility is based on some other factor or some factor other than need. So here, those other factors are age, or disability. So Medicare covers some of the medical needs of the recipient and provides benefits regardless of the person's financial status. So as an example, Bill Gates could qualify for Medicare because it doesn't matter how much money you have. Medicare is sometimes referred to as an entitlement program, which simply means that once you reach that qualifying age, you are automatically eligible for coverage. So like Gordon said, an important point to connect the dots between Medicare and our discussion on SSDI. Once an individual receives those SSDI benefits for 24 months, they automatically qualify for Medicare. So if a child's receiving SSDI benefits based on their parents' work record, that child automatically becomes eligible for Medicare after receiving those SSDI benefits for 24 months. So diving a little deeper to that point, that means that you could have a situation where the individual is receiving both Medicare and Medicaid. The Medicare coming through the receipt of the SSDI benefits, and the Medicaid coming through the waiver programs, which Gordon is going to discuss in a few moments. So that's Medicare in a nutshell. Before we move to Medicaid, are there any questions on the Medicare topic? Let me look. Seeing none, so we will move to Medicaid.
So it comes as a surprise, Matt, to some parents that their child becomes Medicare eligible before they are.
Yeah.
But if as a result of their part-time employment, they do qualify for SSDI, say they do that at age 25, 2 years later, they have Medicare at age 27, the parent may be only 50 years of age and not eligible for a long time yet. So kind of a little surprising to some.
Yeah, and it's having that dual eligibility between Medicare and Medicaid is very, very powerful, because there may be services or coverage that one provides that the other doesn't. So having that fallback and additional coverage is never a bad thing, especially in our context when we're talking about individuals with special needs that may have more severe medical issues. They may need or require more healthcare coverage. So it's important when we talk about that. So now let's move to Medicaid. Medicaid is an umbrella term and actually refers to many different things. So there are several types of Medicaid coverage. So just know that when you hear the term Medicaid, it may not always be referring to the exact same thing every single time. It may be referring to one of many different types of benefits under the larger Medicaid program. So a little bit about Medicaid. It's a jointly funded, meaning federal and state, public assistance healthcare program for low-income individuals and their families. So notice we said low income, so which means that Medicaid is a means-tested benefit and has financial requirements you must meet in order to qualify. So a little background on the how the Medicaid program operates. The federal government requires states to offer Medicaid coverage to certain groups of individuals, and then they give the states the option to cover additional groups. One of the groups of individuals that are required to be covered are individuals with disabilities who have low incomes. Again, it's a needs-based program, financial requirements you must meet. It's implemented by each state individually within the larger federal guidelines. It's government health insurance that can be available to individuals with disabilities, individuals with low incomes. Children could possibly qualify if their parent is receiving Social Security or Social Security disability benefits, again, assuming the family as a whole is meeting those eligibility requirements. And then, of course, within the Medicaid program, we also have the waiver benefits, which we're going to touch on in a minute. So let's move to the next one. Okay. Some additional points about Medicaid. Kentucky is what is called a 1634 state, and I believe Indiana is as well. What this means is that there's an agreement between Social Security and Medicaid when it comes to eligibility determinations. So in a 1634 state, if an individual qualifies for SSI, they automatically become eligible for Medicaid coverage and do not need to apply for benefits separately. So to use Kentucky as an example, Kentucky allows, because of the 1634 agreement, allows Social Security to determine Medicaid eligibility using those SSI criteria that we talked about. This is why when you're applying for Medicaid waivers, as an example, the first step in that process is to apply for SSI, because those SSI criteria are used by both Social Security and Medicaid. We'll go to slide 14. You were good, Gordon. So again, Medicaid pays medical bills of people who have low income and can't otherwise afford medical care, assuming they meet those other eligibility requirements. States design their own program, and they can offer additional coverage to additional groups outside of those that are mandated. People who receive SSI or temporary cash assistance benefits are automatically eligible. They would fall into the category of what we would call the categorically needy. So if you receive SSI, you qualify for SSI, you're automatically eligible for Medicaid coverage. And then the last bullet point again, application to SSI as a prerequisite to applying for Medicaid or the waiver services. And we'll move to the next slide. So a few additional things here. Here are some of the services provided under the Medicaid program. And this list isn't exhaustive, but it is a good starting point. And this slide is a good segue to the final point I want to make on Medicare and Medicaid. So far, we've talked about Medicare and Medicaid and what the programs are, who is eligible, but I also do want to mention briefly the difference in coverage between the two programs. I mentioned earlier that Medicaid is most often the benefit we're trying to preserve the most. And the reason for that is because of the coverage the Medicaid program provides, particularly when it comes to individuals with special needs. As an example, Medicaid can provide skilled nursing coverage, whereas Medicare's coverage in this area is very limited. Medicaid can also provide assisted living or custodial home care through the waiver programs, whereas Medicare doesn't. And Medicaid has no deductibles or copays, whereas Medicare does. So Medicaid covers more of the services someone with special needs would typically require. Examples include long-term care services, rehabilitative services, therapies, all of which Medicare doesn't cover. So that's why preserving the Medicaid eligibility is so important, and is often our main focus, our main goal in the entire planning process. And you'll see how the estate planning process as a whole works to maintain an individual's Medicaid eligibility more when we talk about special needs trusts, and actually even next week when we talk about ABLE accounts. So be sure to join us then so you can start to put together all of these pieces and see how each of them are working together towards our common goals, one of which is maintaining Medicaid eligibility. So any questions on Medicaid before we move to the Medicaid waivers? So if you have a question on Medicaid waivers, hold tight. We'll get to that topic in just a second. And seeing none, so Gordon, I'm going to pass it off to you. And I think the Medicaid waivers, we will wrap up with that.
All right. So Medicaid waivers are programs of added services and benefits beyond regular health care. They originated in legislation that was passed in the 80s and primarily came to fruition in the 90s. This was a response to shuttering or um, uh, uh, changing from an institutional setting to our special family members being in the home and community. And so how can we support them if there's no longer the housing option of the institutional setting? So each state was tasked with the process of coming up with, their waiver programs. And in a moment, we'll talk about Kentucky's and Indiana's waiver programs. But eligibility is based on recipient's income. So there is an income max of $2,382 monthly, and that's overarching. That's not just earned income, but that's all income. So SSI, SSDI, as well as earned income. And asset resource limit still the 2,000 ever present with Medicaid. Eligibility for children is based on the child's status, not the parent. So if the child is under the age of 18, you're seeking to get them on the waiting list for the Michelle P. or pursue the home and community-based waiver, et cetera. These types of things are not based on parents' assets and income. So even if the child's a minor, unlike SSI, food stamps, and other benefits, the financial criteria is waived when it comes to a waiver. So the earlier families get their special needs loved one on the waiting list for Medicaid waiver services, the better, letting time count for you instead of against you. Eligibility for children based on, again, the child's status. At the same time, it's an opportunity to let you know that the child's assets are an issue. So if you have a 12-year-old and you're wanting to pursue the Michelle P. waiver as an example, and the child has a $5,000 savings account, you got a problem. So the parents can have an unlimited amount of resources while they're pursuing the waiver for the child, but the child themselves, that is the individual receiving services, has to stay under the $2,000. With the Medicaid waiver, eligibility comes disability Medicaid, which is usually the most sought after form of Medicaid. Most states have multiple types of Medicaid, and Kentucky and Indiana are no exception. But suffice to say, pursuing the waiver has as an added benefit getting one of the better or more comprehensive forms of Medicaid. So in Kentucky, popular waivers include the home and community-based waiver services. And that's a medically based waiver. So if you have developmental intellectual disability, someone on the autism spectrum, Down syndrome, this type of thing, usually that's not sufficient to qualify for the home and community-based waiver services. You need to look at some element of medical issues such as having seizures, being tube fed, or having a G-tube. Maybe they have ambulatory issues. Again, medical involvement. Otherwise, for developmental and intellectual, the Michelle P. and supports for community living, which has among the longest wait in the nation. So it's highly sought after, but parents usually put their child on the waiting list while they're young and then hope by the time they're 30 or 40, they become eligible. Why wait so long? Because it costs the state a lot of money and resources are limited. But the benefit of the supports for community living, or the SCL waiver, is supported community living or supported living. And therefore, sometimes it's at age 30 or 40 that parents are crying uncle or getting older or trying to seek avenues to how they can maintain balance in their life. And that's just the very point where they're thankful that the eligibility for the supported community living comes in. Services in the home and community are for those with developmental, intellectual, and home and community-based waiver, medically driven, shorter wait, usually no more than maybe 3 to 6 months. So processing time's pretty quick for the home and community-based waiver. I think everyone knows the Michelle P. by this point has a long wait. We're looking at maybe 10 years-ish, depending upon how many people move out of state or the pool of waiting individuals adjust or change. The way to make time count for you instead of against you is to get on the waiting list. The state of Kentucky is divided up into multiple county areas with service providers that contract with the state. So in the greater Louisville area, of course, it is Centerstone was 7 counties, now back to 7 counties again. And they cover the metro area, and that makes it easy for families to make contact to get the process started for getting on the waiting list or pursuing the waiver of their choice. Okay. Indiana, in case we have anyone that has a residence in Indiana, but a part of the Metro Louisville area, therefore receive services or are associated with the Louisville Council on Developmental Disabilities. Every state's different, so the fact that you just live across the river changes everything on the waivers. But the popular waivers in Indiana are the family supports and the community integration habilitation waiver. Those are our equivalent of the Michelle P. and the SCL. And then the aged and disabled waiver, which is our equivalent of the home and community-based waiver. We also have a TBI, traumatic brain injury program, and a choice program. So, and these are administered through different distribution channels, et cetera. But I'm often asked, you know, my kid is 20 something or 30 something, have we missed the boat? And the answer is usually no. It's almost never too late when it comes to special needs and planning. I met with a family this afternoon whose child is 30 years of age, and we're just starting the process of applying for Social Security and waivers, et cetera. So it's not too late. Help, though, is a really good thing with these issues. So this goes through the different waivers, and in the interest of finishing by 8 o'clock, I'm going to move on. But know that the Medicaid waivers, Medicaid waiver programs for either state are the perfect opportunity in the individual consultation, where we can determine what waiver is most appropriate, and if that's where you're currently at, or if not, what we can do to assist you with the application and approval process. Or you're on one waiver and maybe there's a different waiver that would be more suitable or helpful. So we can focus on all of that. There are also health programs that are needs-based, often available at certain levels over the poverty limit, such as Children's Healthcare Insurance Program, and all states, including Kentucky, have versions of this, as well as children with special healthcare needs. So to summarize, Matt and I, you know, we really enjoy our working relationship. It's an informal one, but we partner very often for families so that the legal, the financial, and the government benefit issues are addressed and in a cohesive, organized fashion. So it's important to understand the financial needs, provide financial needs analysis, legal analysis, coordinate efforts so that we leave no stone unturned, offer financial options to make the most of, you know, based on the needs, determine what may be an appropriate level to fund a trust with. And we'll again talk about trust in session 3. Work together to help ensure that benefits such as Medicaid, SSI, and other benefits that we talked about this evening will not be unintentionally jeopardized, and know the questions to ask. Helping caregiver maintain the lifestyle. And it's also planning in such a way that not only do you have peace of mind, but it goes a long way in terms of family members, potentially adult siblings of your child or children with special needs, their willingness to step up and be a part of the team. So planning is great for you. It's great for your child with special needs. And again, it really helps that conversation with the adult brother or the sister of the child with special needs relative to their assistance with the plan. There is our information. So a couple of things. For each session, you should be receiving a pre-workshop email and then a post-workshop email. I think all the notes for the various series were sent out in advance, but hopefully we will be faithful in following up with an email the day of, or in other words, before a workshop and then the day after. So tomorrow's email should mention the free follow-up consultation, though arranging for such is as easy as shooting an email to me or Jamie. Jamie, did you put your email address in the chat box?
I did.
Okay. So getting an individual consultation, again, at absolutely no cost. There's no fee, there's no charge. We set aside typically an hour for Zoom. It goes a little faster in person, about 90 minutes. And we drill deep into all of these issues, again, at no cost or expense to you. And usually it doesn't take more than a few weeks to get a date on the calendar. I know I'm in my Louisville office at least one Saturday a month, and Matt's been known to have an appointment on Saturday as well. And so we do want to accommodate you because I know life is getting busier as COVID retreats. And we certainly want to make ourselves accessible because this information is critically important, the planning important as well. So I show 8 o'clock next week, same time, same place. The topic for next week is, Matt, take it away.
Next week, we are talking about ABLE accounts, which are called stable accounts in Kentucky. So sometimes you may have heard of both of those. We're also talking about guardianship, an important topic as well. At age 18, a lot of parents, a lot of misconceptions about guardianship, when it's needed, what's involved. So be sure with this series, you do need to register for each session individually. So be sure to register for next week's session and join us because it will be very informative, very helpful. And just thank you guys, just to echo what Gordon said, thank you all for being with us. Hopefully you found it helpful. Hopefully you'll be with us through the entire series because we hope by the end, all of this information will start to make sense. You'll start to connect the dots with all of the material. And take advantage of the free follow-up consultation. It doesn't cost you anything but your time. So really, it's a very great opportunity to get the process started to plan for your loved one with special needs. So that's all I have. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Hey guys, we do have one other question that's in the Q&A. It says, can someone have a waiver and be on the wait list for another? Can you have more than one waiver at a time?
Okay, I'll dive in. So the answer is you can have a waiver and be on the waiting list for another. The most common combination in Kentucky is to be on the Michelle P. waiver waiting for the SCL. That's the most common. The question of can I have a more than one waiver at the same time? The answer is no. And that's largely because they have different focuses. And in addition to that, with the many people that are waiting for the waiver, for one person to have more than one waiver would only exacerbate the weight of the many others. So we appreciate that. One last question. We're just a couple of minutes over 8, so I yield back. And Sarah Beth, thanks so much for helping us, and Jamie as well with handling questions and keeping us on task and on track. I do want to also mention next week, it isn't just going to be about guardianship, but we'll have a healthy discussion about guardianship alternatives as well. And so I think you'll really enjoy that because it's a smorgasbord. It isn't yes or no. There are a variety of options, and we'll have a robust discussion about that. So again, we appreciate everyone joining us, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Thanks.